You're tuned in to the Zelos Podcast, the show that's all about the pros behind the pros. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this week is no exception. We've got Jamal Cort in the house, Director of Rehabilitation for the Utah Jazz. And we're going to get underway in just a moment, but before we get started, remember the NSCA's 2025 National Conference is happening this July 16th to the 19th in Kansas City, Missouri. I hope you can join me there. Got a couple presentations, but the networking, the information that others are sharing is amazing. Speaking of sharing information, Perform Better is having an event at the same time in Long Beach, California, their 3-day functional summit. If you're going to be with me in Kansas City, maybe you could join me for another summit in Providence, Rhode Island. That's going to be in August, in the middle of August, the 14th to the 16th. And so if you can't make it to Long Beach, join me in Providence. Go to performbetter.com. And also, you might as well check out the September workshop that I have going on at the Perform Better's Functional Training Institute in West Warwick, Rhode Island. That'll be September 27th, and a one-day event all about recalibrating movement from the ground up. We're going to look at closed-chain biomechanics and how action at the feet greatly affects the kinetic chain all the way up the body. If you can't make those, well, just go to my website, rockysnyder.com. We've got continuing education, online and in-person workshops, and you can get CEUs if you're an athletic trainer, a strength coach, personal trainer, physical therapist, or even a chiropractor. And we've got blogs and the podcast archives, just a whole bunch of things. Go to rockysnyder.com. And while you're online, of course, check out Satanta College. They've got Masters of Science in Applied Sports Biomechanics and Movement Science. They've got a track for Applied Sport and Exercise Psychology. There's one for Performance Coaching. And then they've also got a Masters of Science in Sports Injury and Return to Performance Management. SatantaCollege.com. Enter the code RS10 for 10% off your tuition today. Follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Click that darn subscribe button if you haven't already, and enjoy this conversation. Jamal, thanks for coming on the show. I mean, with Zealous, this timing here with the Summer League, I know you're going to be jammed up against the clock. So to put some time aside to have a conversation with me, just I appreciate it. And so welcome to the podcast.
Appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, it's my pleasure too. So what I normally do, I'd love to hear about how you came to be with the Jazz. Like, what made you get into, not make you, but what encouraged you, enticed you into the position of director of rehab, and your superhero origin story, as we call it.
Yeah. You know, thinking of a way to make this as short as possible because it can get pretty drawn out.
Okay.
But I so I pretty much started off pursuing a degree in nursing when I started undergrad. Had no intentions of even going to college, to be honest. After finishing high school, but I lived at home with my mom, and she wanted me in school, so I had no choice. So I ended up going to Damon College, now Damon University, and I started pursuing a degree in nursing. First time on college, on a college campus. Getting kind of into just like studying like a college student, living that college student life, and I realized I was horrible at it. I did
Well,
decent. I did decent, but I was horrible. I was a horrible student compared to what I was in high school, and it was just really eye opening kind of situation for me. So yeah, I started off doing nursing because at the request of my mom, got into the program. Didn't really like. I liked it. I enjoyed healthcare, but didn't really like it. Didn't really like the idea and that if this was something that I followed, that I would end up being in a hospital. Wasn't the biggest fan of a hospital. So at the time that I switched majors, my school had just started an athletic training program. Didn't really know what athletic training was. Didn't have one in high school. Um, but it made sense to me at the time, when I was changing majors, that there was athletic training and medicine kind of combined in one. In my mind, at 17 years old when I started, I was like, hey, I like sports and also like medicine. This makes sense, at the time. So I got in, went through the curriculum, got into where we were doing clinical rotations. Fortunate enough, I was able to do every sport under the sun almost, minus maybe cheerleading and diving at the time, I guess you could say. While I was at Damon College in their athletic training curriculum, you know, as I went on in the program, kind of really grew a passion for for what was going on. It wasn't until I got my first internship with the Minnesota Vikings was when I got my first kind of exposure to dual credential physical therapist athletic trainer. So that was like my first kind of insight into, okay, this might be something that I want to do down the line. Um, so I finished that training camp with the Vikings in 2013. Went back to school in 2014 to get my master's degree. Right after that, the Vikings actually called me back, for a second rotation during training camp, which is awesome.
Nice.
Couldn't turn it down because in my mind, I'm like, well, when's the next chance am I going to get another opportunity to work in professional sports? So I
Heck
took
yeah.
it. One of the hardest jobs I've ever held in my entire life. Training camp in the NFL, very very hard, especially as a student when you're doing all the grunt work, more or less. Um,
Hmm.
so did that. And then the training camp, I got a chance to go down to Daytona Beach to do Division One basketball in the MEAC conference at Bethune-Cookman University. Love that experience. Great opportunity for me. Immediately following that was when I started applying for like positions within the NBA after that. After I got a taste with the Vikings, I was like, I always kind of knew I wanted to be in the NBA, but nothing was really happening at the time. So, I did it old school, kind of snail mail. I made a hard copy, letter, resume reference, and mailed it out to every single NBA and NFL team just to kind of keep my options open. Um,
Everyone, every team in the
everybody,
NBA and NFL,
everybody. I did it 3 times too.
dude.
I did it three separate times. And between those 3 times, I only heard back from maybe 3 NFL teams, and they all told me no, they didn't have anything. And maybe 2 or 3 NBA teams, one of which being the Knicks. And fortunately enough, I was able to talk to some folks there. I drove back up to New York for an interview, and they offered me their seasonal assistant position during the 2015-2016 season. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it was great. It was nice because it was still intern money, but the fact that I can be back home, and I'm from New York originally, so the fact that I can be back home in New York City, not have to worry about paying rent or anything, and just really focus on being in the in that experience to kind of soaking everything up that I can, while also like building my network of people to hopefully get me into a spot down the line. Um,
You're doing
and
all the right things. That's fantastic.
but it was slow motion, super super slow motion. So made it through that opportunity. While I was there, I also worked with another individual that was dual credentialed in PT and athletic training, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do. Finished with that. I applied to PT school. I actually only applied to one school, the University of St. Augustine, uh, because I had all the prerequisites, and they were pretty much the only applications that I could afford, being on like not having any real money from working all these internships. So I applied and I said, hey, if I get in, I'm gonna go through. If not, I need a plan B. So I applied to one PT school. It was the one that I wanted to go to. So I kind of threw all my chips in on that. Got in. Started in 2016, graduated in 2019. Um, immediately after graduating, one of my buddies that I worked for, well, he was my boss at the time, now a colleague, but he was working with the Vikings when I was there as a student intern. He left to go work for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And one day I get a call from him while I was covering like a youth soccer tournament, something like that in New York. He's like, "Hey, are you willing to come out and help out with summer league for the Minnesota Timberwolves?" Called my boss from the PT clinic that I was working at, that I was doing the outreach for the camp. Said, "Hey, I'm gonna quit this job essentially." And I explained to him why. He 100%, you know, understood. He always, I would always have conversations with him about, potentially working in the NBA one day. And when that opportunity came up, I wasn't willing to just keep working in the PT clinic. And so I quit that job. A few days
Wow.
later, yeah, a few days later, I was in Minnesota. Then from there out to summer league in Vegas, and that was where I interviewed with a few teams. One of them being the Utah Jazz. Um, The position was for their G League affiliate, the Salt Lake City Stars, and that's pretty much where I got my start. Got my start, as the head athletic trainer with the Salt Lake City Stars, and COVID happened, the NBA shut down, and then following the bubble, I was fortunate enough to have been promoted up to the Jazz, where I kind of made my way, through the ranks over the years to where I am now as the head AT and director of rehab.
That is an awesome story, Jamal.
Yeah,
Dude, that
appreciate
is fantastic. And I don't know your mom, but I love her. I mean,
it.
damn, man. Like
Yeah,
there's so many things that have to happen to put you exactly where you are, and they're
yeah,
all, some are big, some are small, but for your mom to just say, yeah, you're going to school, that's all there
yeah,
is. It's like, and this started the whole thing. And for you to knock on doors and not take no for an answer, to send out hard copies to every team. I mean, you got to be hungry and you got to be willing to do the grunt work like through the summer. Oh my gosh, that is fantastic. No wonder. And all that builds up experience for you so that when the opportunity comes to go from Salt Lake City G League up to the NBA team, uh, wow. And
yeah.
so how long have you held the title of director of rehabilitation for the Utah Jazz?
I want to say about 3 years. I've been so August 1st will be the start of year six, and I've held that title for the last 2.5, 3 years, something like that. About 3 years.
Whoa. Okay. Give me a breakdown if you don't mind. Like if you
Yeah.
were to write down, you want somebody taking your spot, you decide you're retiring next month, which you're not going to
Mhm.
do. I'm just saying,
Yeah, yeah.
scenario wise, what would you write down on job descriptions and job duties? What do you see as your descriptions and duties?
Yeah, so as the head AT, primarily, they're on site for the players for like any type of acute care management, so we're there, covering practices, covering games and things like that. As well as just like the daily, management of injuries that may pop up, throughout the course of like, a week or a month, or even like during like the length of a season. So anything that might pop up here and there, that's where I guess you could say like my athletic trainer hat comes on. In addition to like managing our not managing but like working on our EMR and making sure things are up to date with any athletes that I might work with. And then my PT hat comes on more whenever we have any instances to where there are any long-term rehabs, anybody that's post-op, anybody that's going to miss any, significant length of time due to any illness or injury. So that's where my PT hat comes on to where, I'm game planning, start to finish, adjusting, along the way, and then also communicating not only with the other members of the sports medicine staff, but also our strength and conditioning staff, of time of the timing of when it's appropriate to progress, keep things the same or regress in instances where, things change in the athlete's condition. So that's kind of like globally, like athletic training, primarily acute care day to day, logistically, dealing with like the EMR, things like that, and PT, long term rehabs, post op, and things like that.
Do you have guys underneath you that are like head physical therapist, head athletic trainer, or are you taking that hat on yourself?
Yeah. So yes. So my title is head athletic trainer. So I double as both. I double as the head
Oh,
athletic trainer and the director of rehab.
and how many assistants do you have in terms of athletic training?
We have two assistants right now.
Fantastic. Did you
Yeah. What?
recruit them yourself or did they come up along with you?
I played a part in it. It's always like a kind of like a team decision when it comes to trying to find folks that fit. Especially if we're going to be working close together, we all kind of chip in, whether it be in the interview process, whether it be in, reviewing resumes and things like that. But like we all kind of chip in as a staff to try to find a good fit, knowing that who we bring in, we're going to see this person 6, 7 days a week. So they need to be the right fit.
Got it. Okay. Within the realm of athletic training, how much has changed in the last 5 years, and what are the biggest changes, if any, that have occurred? I mean, there's tape and there's ice and there's the general stuff that you'll find in anybody's kit, but What are the newest modalities, philosophies, and approaches, say in the last 5 years, that you've taken on and that are like, yeah, we need to go in this direction?
Yeah. Um, I'm of the mindset of trying not to get too much in depth with the bells and whistles. There's so many different vendors and so many different products that come out all the time, that it's easy to get lost in the weeds of, just because it's a new technology doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good or worthwhile for what you're trying to accomplish. Like some of the things that we use, like we have Shockwave, we have a device called the Indiba, which is, like the essentially diathermy, 2.0, for deep heating and tissue healing. We have, Novathor, light therapy beds. um BFR is probably the biggest thing we use, whether it be for prep, whether it be for recovery, whether it be for rehab. We have like little things here and there, but the bulk of what we do is manual joint mobilizations, exercise, and then putting a big emphasis on recovery. Yes, there's a place for certain modalities like the ones that I mentioned, but I think those are just to help facilitate the proper environment to get to what we want to with these athletes when in regards to like healing and return to play.
Oh, and that holds true for physical therapy too, or
Yeah,
there's
certainly.
elements in, yeah.
No, it's so much crossover between the two that it's like what I'm using in athletic training, I'm using in PT. Like, there's not a lot of like difference per se when it comes to, what capacity I'm functioning in when it comes to certain things. Like, treatment is treatment, rehab is rehab. And the focus for me, I take it to a very elementary level to where, and I didn't pick this up in athletic training, but I picked it up in PT school because athletic training we don't get a ton of rehab training. But I had a professor that would always say, "What are the impairments? What are the impairments? Like, if ever I get lost, if ever I feel like I don't know how to approach a new injury or anything like that, I go down to that foundational starting point of where that person is. Okay, is there a strength deficit? Is there decreased joint mobility? Is there weakness? Is there pain? Is there fusion? Is there swelling? What are the impairments? And once I could identify and essentially rank what I think are the biggest impairments to the smallest impairments, then I start checking those boxes as I knock each and every one of them out as I go through that rehab process.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, I say go back to the basics. Anytime I have analysis paralysis through analysis, and I'm just getting overwhelmed by what I'm seeing and measuring and everything else, it's just like, okay, wait a minute. There's way too much noise. I don't even know where to begin. Just go back to the basics. What's
Hmm.
missing, basically? And for your case, what are the impairments? But
Hmm.
isn't it fascinating that, like, the more you learn, the more you not the more, but you keep that doesn't change, I guess. There's always those moments where you're like, man, just step back and look at the basics. I
Hmm.
mean, that's it's good advice for anybody, I
Yeah,
think.
for
um
sure.
what's the noise for you, though? Like, I know what my noise is when I'm working with people. I know what I'm looking for, and then it just becomes not overwhelming, but there's so much information. What are your places that you can have an abundance of information where you have to say, okay, hold on, what are the impairments?
Hmm. I think sometimes when it comes to like looking at it from like the capacity from sports science, like I think it's amazing that we have access to all these new technologies that we can get all this data. We're looking at asymmetries, looking at all these deficits. We're looking at like these MRIs to assess muscle mass, and you're looking at injured side versus uninjured limb and things like that. And I think it's great, but I think most of the noise comes from just the overwhelming abundance of numbers. I think it's really easy to get lost in the weeds when you have a lot of just essentially like analytics about what this person's like makeup is at the time of injury or at the time of beginning to return to play. And I think when we get that, we can sometimes forget that we're still treating this person and not just their injury. And I think sometimes what gets missed is what is it that, because our job is to look at what is it like, what do we need to do to manage this injury, but we also have to look at what does this individual need to feel comfortable to get back to their sport. Because we could do everything in the world, we could do everything by the book, take all the force plays, the last jump lane. We can do all these different things, but if you've never had a conversation with a player to understand where they're at mentally, then we're not treating the whole problem. We're just treating what we think is most important. And I think because of numbers, we can kind of get lost in that and forget that, hey, we need to figure out where this person's at mentally.
Is that where your sports science, your sports psychologist or mental skills coach, or I mean, they go by many titles these days. I can
Yeah.
never keep up with the different ones, but you've got somebody that, on your staff that does that.
Yeah, definitely. Like they play a part in it for sure. But I like to do a lot of like this, and it's not anything that's like formal. This is more so me as I'm going through the course of like a reevaluation. As we get to a certain part of the rehab, like something that I like to ask a guy. I was like, hey, where are you at percentage wise? If you had to play tonight, where would you say you're at percentage wise from being where you want to be? And if he tells me anything less than 100, I'll say why. Like, what do you think is missing? What do you think that, from what we're doing, that isn't isn't attacking what you need to attack, that will put you in this place of comfort to be able to perform? And I think that's super, super important information for me, because I'm not the one that has to go play. I'm not the one that has to return from an injury and figure out how to play without thinking about not hurting myself again. So I think a hurdle that I like to try to address early on is to get them thinking about how to explain what they're feeling, how they're feeling, and what we can do to help them to get to where they want to be.
So, is that a verbal conversation? Is that a subjective questionnaire? Is that a combination of a bunch of things? Like, how do you attain that inside information on your players?
I usually do it at the end of a session. I'll catch them in the locker room. I'll catch them after they're finished lifting. A good time is when they're doing recovery. Like most guys, as part of the recovery, we'll throw them in the hydro works. That's 15 to 20 minutes where they're stuck with me. So as they're doing the leg swings and they're doing this, the functional movements and walking, and the hydro, like that I'll take that time to pick their brain, because I want them to, especially like as like these athletes are getting younger and younger, and I think that they're not given enough opportunities to develop mentally to be able to tell you deeper than I sprained my ankle. Like, what does that mean? Like, okay, you sprained your ankle. Okay, now what? Like, we're doing all these amazing things. We're doing all the things that we think will get you where you want to go. But if you're if when it's time for you to go, if the numbers say you're good, there's symmetry, there's strength, there's no pain, there's no swelling, there's no effusion, but you still have a mental barrier, you might hurt yourself again, because now you're thinking about it. Like, you're consciously thinking about, you know, potentially avoiding that injury, not realizing that you're putting something else at risk. So just through
I'm
like
really glad you're
just
bringing this up.
yeah.
Honestly, this is great to talk about, Jamal, because I just got back from a great conference, brilliant minds, all talking about return to performance, especially as it pertains to like lower body injuries. And
Hmm.
a lot of the presenters, and maybe I was just not listening the way I should, but it seemed to me that there were certain landmarks, that there were certain points that you had to hit in regards to isokinetic measurements of whether it's the hamstring or the calf or the groin or something. It's like, okay, once they get back to their pre-injury status in
Hmm.
terms of length and symmetry or reduction of asymmetry, then we're good to go to the next stage. But
Hmm.
I don't think anybody, maybe I missed it, but we're talking about what you're talking about, which is, hey, let's talk to the athlete. What's their confidence level? Is there kind of a range that we could go where what is it that they're feeling in regards to their injury, to their return, to all of that? I think that's essential. That's critical.
No, absolutely. And again, like those, like those benchmarks that you talked about, like those things are super important because it gives us as a clinician a level of confidence to progress to the next thing. Um, but that's just it's a big part of the picture. But we always go back to the person. We can't forget about the person.
Yeah. No, it has to be looking at the athlete. And because those numbers might shine and they may be back to exactly where you want them to be physically, speed wise, flexibility, mobility, however you want to measure it from a physiological standpoint. But from a mental, emotional, psychological standpoint, that has to be taken into consideration.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What's your biggest challenge? Like, period. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Trying to find ways to so if we're speaking from the standpoint of rehab, trying to find ways to keep the athlete engaged, um while sticking true to your values.
Okay, give me an
Like,
example without naming names. What are you talking
yeah.
about?
So just so I so right now I'm reading a book called The Anxious Generation, and it talks about how so I was born in 90. So when I was born, and before that, I was raised under like a play based kind of like theory of like development, right? To where I was able to get outside, I was able to play with my friends, I was able to get hurt, build resilience in the real world. um and now, as we, like with the innovation of the iPhone, with the innovation of all these different technologies, from like from the early 2010s to now, you have a more phone based development with kids, as they grow into adulthood. So now you're dealing with folks that don't necessarily know how to engage face to face. They don't necessarily know, with how fast information is, with how easy it is to obtain information. The attention span goes from one thing to the next, and it becomes a challenge, especially when dealing with younger athletes. To like, I'm not gonna do our rehab on a TikTok video. Like, I'm 34. I don't even know how to use TikTok, and I'm young enough to know, but that's not, it's just not something that I've ever been interested in. But it becomes a challenge to try to figure out, how do I get these, younger athletes to stay engaged when their attention is diverted in so many different avenues almost 90% of the day.
Right. Oh my gosh. You bring up a point that I hadn't been considering. Like the rookies or second years were in high school when COVID broke out. So now they got there not only with social media and their bombardment with screens, but now they were taken away from their peers more or less, and that social interaction, the skills at the time in their adolescent life when they were supposed to be really developing were put on pause, and
Yeah,
now they've gone out of it, and here you have them. So
yeah.
dude, that's got to be. I didn't even think about that. What is now? Is there a noticeable difference? Let's just say with the 23, 22, 21, 23, that year old, those type of players in that age range compared to guys that are in their late 20s, early 30s, more toward
Big
your age.
difference. Big difference. Because the guys that are 25, let's say 25 plus, you know, a, a good amount of these folks have, like, they're married, they have kids, so like their ability to interpret incoming information, save what's important, and then reuse it later is a lot higher than some of the rookies, sophomores coming into the league. Just and I think it stems from just the lack of attention. It is not like I don't think it's their fault. I just think it's with all these technologies, it becomes very difficult to find ways to keep them engaged. Even if they love basketball to death, it's like, yeah, they love basketball, but they also like distractions. They like, like
Wow.
what they're seeing, and it's like, like you're competing with that. Like you're competing with,
A scroll
Instagram.
memory,
You
scrolling
know,
memories.
yeah,
Just
it's
like
like
flip, flip, flip. That's all you see.
yeah, short like everything is so short term, and it's like you have to find a way to, and you're probably not going to win 100% of the time, but if you can get them to at least lock in most of the time, I think your outcomes are going to be good. And that's why I take that approach that I mentioned earlier in terms of asking them where they're at. So if I have a new rehab, I'll like come up with like a timeline. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'll come up with a timeline. I'll go to the player and I'll go, okay, here's what I'm thinking for the first 3 weeks, first 2 months, first 6 months, first 3 months of the season when we start playing. And I'll go over that with him. I say, hey, are you like what do you think about this? Now the reason I do that is because if I could get them to take responsibility for their own bodies, for their own recovery, then I find that they're more engaged because they have now taken ownership because I have given them a space to give me their input versus me just saying, hey, you do this, 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 and this. I say, hey, here's what I think you should be doing. Is there anything on here that you think I'm missing or that you would like to see that we may not hit here based off of what I think we should be doing?
Sweet. So you're asking them to have their own buy-in, participate.
Yeah,
Right on.
yeah.
Uh, what are some other ways that you keep them engaged? Like right now, if you're giving a presentation on stage to a whole bunch of other athletic trainers and physical therapists talking about the work you do with your athletes, like how do you keep the younger generation engaged?
Repetition, repetition, repetition. For like,
For those that are not watching the video, he's rolling his eyes. His head's cocked back. He's like,
you
he
know,
reminds me of my old man going, "Damn it, dumbass! I told you this 3,000 times already."
you know, because it's like it gets old for me because I find myself saying the same thing over and over again. But for them, something that I've said to them 20 times, they might have only actually heard me say it 5 times. So I'm fatigued mentally because I'm like I just told you this yesterday. I just texted you this morning. It's incredible to where like I would get asked the question. I'll say, look at your text message. We had a conversation about this not even 24 hours ago. But it's like that's part of the deal, right? That's part of even at home with my niece and my nephews, it's just like they're a lot younger, but it's the same thing. It's like they're it's gonna stick eventually. It's gonna be faster for some, it's gonna be slower for some. But you have to exercise patience. As irritating as it can get sometimes, you have to exercise patience and you're gonna repeat yourself. That's just the nature of the game. But
Hey,
at some point they're gonna get it. But if you make them take ownership, I find that they get it a little bit faster.
right on. Okay, so they're going through the spectrum. They're going down the pathway of rehab to RTP.
Hmm.
And do you guys have yourself like a rehab strength conditioning specialist, like rehab strength coach, or is that kind of blended between strength coach and your medical staff? Like how does your pathway work?
Uh, I think we take more of a blended approach, you could say. I think we're very fortunate our setup to where we have a guy that's rehabbing. If it's like depending on the severity of the injury, like if somebody's completely out, like those first, depending on the length of time, but those first few days or few weeks, depending on the injury, they're gonna primarily see me. We're gonna manage those impairments that I talked about. We're gonna get the swelling down, get the pain down, get some baseline strength back, get some baseline range of motion back. But there's gonna come a time where there's gonna be a blend now. We're gonna cross over to where it's gonna be 60% training room, then 40% weight room, and then slowly as they get closer and closer and closer to return to play, it's gonna flip. It's gonna end up being 40% training room, and it's gonna be 60% weight room. Um, I'm like I said, I'm lucky enough to be able to work with our strength staff to where I can go to our strength and conditioning coach. I usually give him like a quick rundown. I'll do a reassessment every morning. I say, hey, here's where they're at pain wise. Here's their report from the stuff that they did yesterday. Here's how they felt. Here's what I think we should try. Um, and that could be keeping things the same. That could be progressing. But I'll always go to him, and then I essentially he like we've worked together so long to where I can give him information, and then he can kind of figure out the rest. And also by working with him, he knows the right questions to ask, as a guy is going through, an exercise, like, because these are things that I would ask, as they're going through something. Does it hurt? If it hurt, how much does it hurt? How long? What's the quality of the pain? And depending on that answer, that's going to dictate what we do with that exercise. And we kind of chip away like that, as we kind of go through the spectrum. But we have that blended approach to where I can go to my strength coach and we have that conversation, and he does it, and then we kind of collab together. What worked, what didn't work, and then what's next steps.
Right on. Okay, and then when it comes to influential figures for you in regards to your career, like the technical information, coaching information, however you want to point it, like where do you go? Who are your mentors, or what information are you seeking out?
Um, when I need it, I lean pretty heavy, on like the guys that I worked with. I think I did it more so at the beginning of, when I started, because I felt every day like I didn't know what I was doing. It's like it's almost like that, imposter syndrome. Like you're here in this space and you're expected to perform, you're expected to never make a mistake, and you're expected to get these guys better. So like a lot of the folks that kind of helped me get to this place. So like the folks from the Vikings that I've worked with that are now doing amazing things with other teams, some of them, like the folks that I've met in the league over the years that I used early on, just for advice about certain things that might pop up. Not necessarily from the standpoint of, okay, treatment approach, but just learning how to manage an injury while working in the NBA. Because there's so
Mm,
many nuances that they don't necessarily teach you, or I don't think anybody can really teach you it. You know, you kind of have to go through it and understand, the different politics that comes with, like, there's politics with injuries. So it's like, so I think the biggest thing is learning how to navigate the politics, learning how to drown out the noise. And I think those folks that I worked with over the years, like with the Knicks, with the Vikings, with the Timberwolves, those guys have been influential and give me the advice that I need to kind of stay leveled when outside influence try to move the needle one way or another.
mhm. Do you feel yourself being pulled I won't say often, but more than occasionally
Oh, it happens all the time.
by that
It happens all the
all the
time. I
time?
mean, yeah, I mean, because like you have a player, like depending on the player, you know, like that person might pull the needle. Like, hey, can I play today? Can I do this? Can I do? I'm like, you can't even walk yet. How are you gonna play? Then from the coaching side, like they're asking to do more, and it's not coming from a bad place. They just want this
Sure.
person to perform, but you have to set that boundary early so that when it happens, or if when it happened, inevitably somebody else is gonna get hurt, and when it happens again, maybe they'll pull a little bit less, and they'll pull a little bit less, to where like they have an understanding of, hey, this is what he said. These are the parameters that he set for this person. Especially when it comes to return to play, because people hear return to play, and they want to go 100 miles an hour. And it's like, no, well, they have to, ease into it like with anything else, and it's like if you can set that boundary early, they'll pull a little bit less as they gain more understanding of what your goal is, and then it just makes it easier for everybody to work together.
Hmm. No, I get it. Which, yeah, you're trying to balance wins with player health, and
Yeah,
depending on who you're talking to, it'll sway in one direction or the other. Yeah,
yeah,
I totally see that. So, uh, when kind of backtracking a little bit, talking to the players as they're going through that return to play and hopefully getting to that return to performance. Yeah, you've got to have players that don't really want to share much.
yeah,
That you, how do you deal with that? Like there's this fear that if I tell you really what's going on, I'm not going to see court time.
yeah.
Like that's got to happen.
It You'll see it mostly with like, no, actually, no, that'd be a lie if I said that. No, yeah, you'll see it across the spectrum. You'll see it with vet players. You'll see it with, you know, younger players. I find it to be a little bit easier because I think that lack of communication just comes from inexperience. So I think over time they get better at it. Um, but you have to convince. Like I like to say, well, actually, so I learned from one of my buddies from the Knicks. He goes, everybody in this league, everybody has their gimmick, right? Whether it's like modalities, whether it's massage, like whatever their niche thing is, everybody has their gimmick, and you become good at what you do based off of how good you can sell your gimmick to your players. Because everybody thinks
Mm,
what they do works,
yeah.
rightfully so, because they're probably working in professional sports because something that they did works, right? So, but to get to the point of being able to sell your quote unquote gimmick to that player, you have to find commonality. You have to find something to get them running their mouth.
Mm,
The quiet I've met the quietest, closed off, stonewall players. If you find something in common with that person that they like, they will never shut up. And then that's what and now like you've kind of broken down the barrier of communication. So now, okay, that's your, essentially your opportunity to attack. Like, okay, now I got them talking. Now let's get them talking about what I need them to talk about.
got
and
it.
and and now once I get to that point, now I can implement my gimmick per se.
Yeah. What's your gimmick?
I love my joint mobilizations. Like I love joint
Ooh,
mobilizations, joint manipulations. I think it's fun. I know it scares some people, especially when you start talking about cervical. But I think, you know, unless you're involved in PT or you're a rehab clinician that has experience dealing with like the neurological side of things, I think that's a part that gets missed and overlooked. And a part of that comes from joint manipulation. When you're talking about the brachial plexus, you're talking about the lumbar plexus and things like that, and how they associate with different dermatomes and myotomes of the upper lower extremity. I think that gets overlooked so much, and I get kind of excited to try to see what outcomes I can get by starting treatment sessions, with the OA or C1 C2 manipulations if it's an upper body, or L1 L2 lower body manipulations if it's something in lower extremity, and seeing if doing some of those things on the front end for modalities and then followed by exercises, do my outcomes change? And it's just like that's I like to see it. Like they feel good going into it if they get a good crack from a different, from a different manipulation. A lot, like I said, a lot of folks are skeptical about it just because of the fear that comes associated with it, specifically cervical. But once they see somebody else do it, once they see that I'm comfortable doing it, they slowly buy in, and I slowly get to have fun. I have fun with that stuff. So
I love it. Yeah, we could talk that all day long. But as it turns out, we're kind of up against the clock here. But yeah,
okay.
I go down the other end. I work with foot mobilization, and
Hmm.
I love it. I dig it.
It's so
We'll
great.
definitely have to share notes on that. But hey, if people want to follow Jamal Court, on and off the court. Well, it's like a pun right there. Like, how do we do it? I know LinkedIn is always a good place, but are you on Instagram or anything like that? I know
Yeah, I
not
am on
TikTok. You already
Instagram.
told me about that.
Oh my goodness, I don't even I don't even know where to begin. I couldn't even tell you where to start with that. So on Instagram, it's gonna be underscore Jamal Cort, JamalCort. That's a great way to to connect with me. Send me a message if you ever want to talk shop. Just reach out to me. I'm pretty open to talk about almost anything. If you have something of value to teach me, I love it. I love to learn. I like to see what's out there, and I like to add things to my gimmick to make it better.
Right on. I can't thank you enough for coming on. This has been great.
No, for sure. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Boom! And just like that, it's a done deal. I can't thank Jamal enough, as well as the Utah Jazz organization, for making this a possibility. Remember, this July, in just a couple of weeks, we've got the NSCA's National Conference, Kansas City, Missouri, July 16th to the 19th. It just so happens the same thing is happening in Long Beach for the Perform Better Training Summit, the Functional Summit, 3 days of learning. So you go to nsca.com, check out performbetter.com, maybe even join me in Providence, Rhode Island in the middle of August for the Perform Better 3-day functional summit on the East Coast. And then at the end of September on the 27th in West Warwick, Rhode Island, come to the Functional Training Institute that Perform Better has. It's an amazing facility. I'll be doing recalibrating movement from the ground up. Be sure to check out my website, yada, yada, yada. You know the drill. In the meantime, check out Setanta College and make it a good week. We'll see you next time.